My name is Sarah Granger. I am 31 years old, and I have drawn blood 4 times in the state of Oklahoma, each time with a steady hand, each time in complete silence, and each time I walked away not because I escaped, but because not a single jury in this land could figure out what, exactly, I was supposed to be. Property doesn't plan. Property doesn't wait. Property doesn't learn anatomy from watching men get whipped and hogs get slaughtered, then apply that knowledge with the patience of a woman who has been measuring the world with her eyes long before she ever dared touch it with her hands. They called me dangerous. They called me a paradox. I call myself something far simpler, a woman who decided, very early on, that survival was not a gift anyone was going to hand her. Before I tell you what was hidden in that Bible, I need to ask you something. If you had to choose between signing your name to a lie to survive or telling the truth and risking everything, what would you do? Comment below, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. You're not just watching a story, you're keeping it alive. But here's what I need you to understand before I tell you the rest. This is not a story about rage. Rage is loud. Rage is sloppy. Rage gets you hanged before breakfast. What I carried inside me was something colder and far more precise. It had been building since the first time I pressed my face against the crack of a schoolhouse wall in Alabama and memorized letters I was forbidden to learn. It had been sharpening itself every single night for years, quiet as a blade wrapped in cotton cloth, hidden where no man thought to look. By the time James Wickham laid his hand on my shoulder that November night in 1842, I was not acting out of desperation. I was delivering a consequence he had already chosen for himself. And that distinction, that single, terrible distinction, is what changed everything that came after. The Wickham property sat on flat Oklahoma land that smelled of red clay and rotting wood after every rain. The main house was white, or it had been white once, before the sun and the years had turned it the color of old teeth. From the quarters, you could see the light in Charlotte Wickham's bedroom window every night, a single candle that burned until the laudanum took her somewhere else entirely. The air in that place had a weight to it, thick with the smell of livestock and chimney smoke and something else underneath, something sour and human that never quite left your clothes no matter how long you washed them. The field stretched out flat in every direction, and in the early morning, when the mist sat low over the cotton, you could almost convince yourself the world was peaceful. Almost. But the land lied the way all beautiful things lie, quietly and without apology. My days on that property began before the light came and ended well after it left. I was what they called a house girl, which meant I cooked, I cleaned, I mended, I starched, I carried, and I disappeared the moment I was no longer needed. I had learned by then how to make myself small in a room, how to move without sound, how to keep my face empty while my eyes recorded everything. I knew which floorboard creaked near the study door. I knew how long it took Charlotte's laudanum to pull her under. I knew the exact schedule of every man on that property, including which nights Wickham sent the overseer to town. Information was the first currency I ever earned, and I spent none of it carelessly. Every detail I gathered, I stored. Every pattern I noticed, I cataloged. I was building something, even then, though I could not yet have told you exactly what it was. The wound I carried was not the kind that bleeds. It was older than Wickham, older than Oklahoma, older than the $850 he paid for me like I was a draft horse with good teeth. It started in Alabama, in the body of a girl who had pressed her eye against the split wood of a schoolhouse wall and watched white children learn to read, and felt something ignite in her chest that no one had the right to put out. I had taught myself letters from discarded newspapers, from labels on medicine bottles, from the names carved into fence posts, and I had paid for that knowledge with the particular terror of being caught, because an educated slave was a threat, and threats got dealt with in ways that left marks that never healed. I had watched what happened to men who were considered dangerous. I had decided very early that when my moment came, I would not be considered dangerous. I would simply be impossible to explain. It was a Tuesday night in November, and the cold had come early that year, settling into the walls of the quarters like it meant to stay. I remember the exact texture of the blanket I was lying under, rough wool, smelling of lye soap and other people's sweat. I was not sleeping. I never slept on Tuesday nights. I lay still with my eyes open in the dark, listening to the particular silence that meant Charlotte's candle had gone out and the laudanum had done its work. I heard his boots on the frozen ground before I saw anything, that slow, deliberate crunch that he never bothered to disguise, because why would he? He owned every inch of that ground, every plank of that floor, and as far as he was concerned, everybody sleeping behind that door. I heard him pause outside. I heard him breathe. And then the door opened, and the cold came in with him, and I felt the specific weight of what was about to happen settle over the room like a second darkness. When his hand touched my shoulder, I smelled him before I fully turned. Whiskey and hair pomade, and that particular sourness of a man who believes he is entitled to whatever room he walks into. I did not flinch. I did not cry out. I turned slowly, and I looked directly at his face, something he did not expect, because women in that place had learned to look away. And I said it clearly, quietly, in a voice I had been practicing in my own mind for longer than I could remember. I will kill you if you touch me again. He laughed. It was a short laugh, dismissive, the laugh of a man who has never once been taken seriously by someone he considered beneath him. And in that laugh, I heard his decision. He had made his choice. He had been making it, really, for years. All he had done tonight was finally say it out loud. And I had already made mine. It took less time than people imagine. 3 seconds, perhaps 4. The cotton-picking knife I had spent 3 weeks slowly sharpening against the stone lip of the water trough and wrapped each night in a strip of flour sack hidden beneath a loose board under my sleeping mat was in my hand before he processed what was happening. I did not strike in panic. I struck with the precision of a woman who had spent months studying where the body is most vulnerable and least fatal, because I did not want him dead. Dead men become martyrs, and martyrs create consequences I could not survive. I wanted him diminished, permanently, specifically, surgically diminished. When it was done, he was on the floor making a sound I will not describe, and I was already standing up, wrapping the knife in its cloth. I walked to the main house, knocked on the back door, and when the night girl opened it, I handed her the knife by the handle and said, "Wake someone. Mr. Wickham needs a doctor." Then I walked to the front steps, sat down in the cold, and waited. They came for me before sunrise. 4 men, the overseer, 2 field hands pressed into service as witnesses, and a sheriff from the next county who smelled of sleep and irritation. They did not restrain me. I think that confused them. I was sitting exactly where I had placed myself, hands folded in my lap, back straight, watching the horizon go from black to the particular bruised purple that comes just before dawn in Oklahoma. The sheriff asked me what happened. I told him the truth, every detail, in order, without embellishment and without apology. I watched his face move through several expressions he did not know how to control. He had come expecting hysteria or denial or the particular blank silence of someone who has been broken past the point of language. What he got instead was a calm, precise account delivered by a woman who looked him directly in the eye the entire time. He did not know what category to put me in. That confusion was my first defense, and I had been counting on it. In the days that followed, locked in a storage room they converted into a holding cell, I had nothing but time and the sound of wind pushing through gaps in the wooden walls. I will not pretend I felt no fear. Fear is not weakness. Fear is information, and I had learned to read it the same way I read everything else. What I felt in that room was a cold, specific fear, not of dying, but of being made into something small, of having my actions reduced to the story of an animal that bit its owner. I lay on the dirt floor at night, and I thought about every woman still sleeping in those quarters, and I understood that whatever happened to me in that courtroom was going to mean something to them too, whether they knew my name or not. That thought did not comfort me. It steadied me. There is a difference. Comfort softens you. Being steadied keeps your spine in the right position when they finally open the door. The first trial was in the spring of 1843. The courthouse in that county was a single room with unpainted walls and a wood stove that smoked badly and made everyone's eyes water. Wickham appeared as a witness, walking, though not comfortably, and his attorney argued that I was dangerous property, a financial liability, a thing that had malfunctioned and needed to be destroyed. The word destroyed was used without any particular emphasis, the way you might say a wagon wheel needed replacing. I sat at the front of that room and I listened, and I kept my face arranged into an expression of careful, neutral attention. My own representation was a young lawyer named Aldous, who had taken the case because it confused him, and he was the kind of man who could not leave a confusing thing alone. He asked me one question before we entered that room. "Did you plan it?" I said, "I prepared for the inevitable." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Don't change a single word of that." What I had not accounted for, what nearly undid everything, was the intervention of a circuit judge named Harlan Pruitt, who arrived for my second hearing in 1847 with a personal investment in establishing a legal precedent that would make examples of women like me across 3 territories. Pruitt was not cruel in the obvious way. He was methodical. He had reviewed the transcript of my first trial, and he had identified the precise philosophical crack in my defense, the question of intent versus instinct, and he intended to seal it permanently. He brought 2 physicians to testify that my actions demonstrated premeditation incompatible with the recognized mental capacities of my classification. He used the word classification with great care, the way a man uses a surgical instrument. He was trying to cut away the part of my defense that required me to be recognized as capable of rational thought. If he succeeded, I would no longer be a paradox. I would simply be a malfunctioning piece of property, and property could be disposed of without the inconvenience of a jury's conscience. The night before Pruitt's ruling was expected, I lay in the county jail and felt something I had not allowed myself to feel in years, a profound physical exhaustion that had nothing to do with my body. It was the exhaustion of holding a shape under pressure for so long that you begin to forget what you look like before the pressure started. I was 36 years old. I had been sharp and careful and precise and strategic for so long that I could no longer locate the girl who had pressed her face against the schoolhouse wall and felt wonder at the shape of letters. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, and I thought about all the women who had come before me, whose names I did not know, who had made choices in the dark that no court ever heard about, whose bodies were buried in fields that grew cotton on top of them. And I made myself a promise, not of survival, because survival had started to feel like too small a word. I promised myself that whatever happened next, I would make sure it meant something beyond my own skin. The ruling came on a Thursday morning, gray and cold, with ice forming on the inside of the jail window. But Pruitt's decision was not what changed everything. What changed everything was a letter, folded into the lining of a Bible, that a Methodist minister named Caleb Morse had been permitted to bring me the evening before. I had assumed it was scripture. I almost did not unfold it. When I did, I found 6 pages written in a small, disciplined hand. The handwriting of a woman, I knew immediately, from the particular economy of the strokes, the way each letter was formed with the care of someone who had learned to write in secret and never lost the habit of making every word count. It was signed only with initials, E.P., but what it contained was something I had not known existed. A complete legal analysis of 3 prior cases in Ohio and Pennsylvania, where enslaved women had been acquitted on grounds of self-preservation, cross-referenced with specific language from territorial statutes that Pruitt had been carefully avoiding. Someone had done this research deliberately. Someone had been watching my case and preparing this document for months. I was not alone in this the way I had believed I was. That letter rewired everything I thought I understood about my situation. I had made myself believe, because the alternative was unbearable, that I was operating in complete isolation, that every calculation I made, every careful word I chose in those courtrooms, Every night I spent constructing arguments in my head while lying on a jail floor had been the work of a single woman in a sealed room. But EP's letter told a different story. There were others, not many, perhaps a dozen women across 4 states, connected by a network so careful and so deliberately invisible that it had survived for years without a single arrest. They moved information the way I had moved it, in margins, in linings, in the memorized spaces between words that carried different meanings depending on who was reading them. They had been watching cases like mine and building a body of legal knowledge that existed nowhere official, that was owned by no institution, that could not be confiscated because most of it lived inside human minds. And they had decided, for reasons the letter did not fully explain, that my case was worth protecting, that I was worth protecting. I read those 6 pages 4 times before the light failed, and then I committed every word to memory and fed the pages to the candle flame, one by one. The morning after I burned those pages, Aldous came to see me with the look of a man carrying something heavy in both hands. He sat down across from me and he told me that Pruitt had offered a resolution. Not a ruling, a resolution. If I agreed to be transferred permanently to a property in Mississippi, far from Oklahoma's territorial courts, far from the cases I had become inconveniently associated with, and if I signed a document acknowledging that my actions had been the result of mental defect rather than rational decision, Pruitt would ensure I was not executed. He would classify me as damaged property, arrange a sale, and close every file with my name in it. Aldous explained this carefully, watching my face. The alternative was a ruling that would set a precedent making it legal to execute enslaved women for acts of self-defense across 3 territories. A precedent that would reach far beyond me, that would close a door that was currently, barely, still open. I understood what he was not saying directly. That accepting meant erasing myself. That refusing meant other women might die for the door I kept open by refusing. I sat with that choice for a long time in the silence of that room. I thought about EP and her careful handwriting. I thought about the women in the network I had never met who had spent months protecting a stranger because they believed the stranger's case mattered. I thought about the quarters at the Wickham property and every Tuesday night that had happened there before mine, and every one that would have continued happening if I had kept my eyes closed and my knife hidden and my voice silent. And then I thought about something colder and more specific. I thought about what it would mean to sign my name to a lie about my own mind, to declare in writing before a court that I had not been rational, that the most deliberate, carefully considered act of my life had been the product of defect rather than decision. And I understood that this was not actually a choice between my life and other women's lives. It was a choice between 2 kinds of survival. The kind that keeps your body breathing, and the kind that keeps the truth of what you are intact. I told Aldous no. I told him clearly, without drama, the same way I had told Wickham I would kill him. And I watched his face do the same thing the sheriff's face had done, move through expressions it did not know how to settle into. Pruitt's hearing was set for a Monday, but something happened on the Saturday before it that no one, not Pruitt, not Aldous, not the sheriff, and not I, had anticipated. Aldous arrived at the jail in the early afternoon with a leather satchel and the expression of a man who has just watched something impossible occur in broad daylight. He laid 7 documents on the table between us without speaking. They were affidavits, sworn, signed, and notarized, from 4 white landowners in Pennsylvania and Ohio, 2 retired circuit court clerks, and 1 county magistrate, all attesting to the legal precedents EP's letter had identified, all specifically addressing the territorial statute language Pruitt had been exploiting. They had been delivered simultaneously to the territorial governor's office, to the county courthouse, and to 2 newspaper editors, one in St. Louis and one in Cincinnati, that same morning. Whoever had coordinated this had done it with a precision that made my courtroom performances look improvised. The network had moved, and they had moved in a way that made Pruitt's resolution not merely inconvenient, but publicly, documentably untenable. He could not proceed without every newspaper in 4 states asking why he was ignoring sworn affidavits from white men of standing. I sat in that jail and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, something that was not strategy and not fear. It was something quieter and more dangerous than either. It was the specific feeling of not being alone.
Pruitt withdrew the resolution on Monday morning without explanation. My fourth and final acquittal came 6 weeks later, delivered by a jury that could not look at me directly when they read the verdict, which told me everything I needed to know about what it had cost them to say the word not guilty in reference to a woman like me. Drummond, the man who had most recently held my papers, signed my freedom document 3 months after that, not out of conscience, I understood, but because my continued presence in Oklahoma had become a liability his lawyers could not comfortably manage. I walked out of that office on a Tuesday morning, which felt appropriate, and I stood on the unpainted wooden sidewalk outside and looked at the flat red land stretching out in every direction, and I felt the cold November air move through my lungs, and I made no dramatic gesture and said no memorable words to anyone standing nearby, because that was not who I was, and it was not how I had survived. I simply noted the date, noted the quality of the light, noted the direction of the wind, and began walking. I had work to do, and now I had the particular freedom of being able to do it without a jail cell waiting at the end of every day. They got me in the end, not with a jury, not with a judge, but with a postal fraud charge so thin it would have embarrassed a first-year law clerk, because that is what they do when they cannot defeat you honestly. The walls of Fort Leavenworth are limestone, and in winter they sweat cold water that runs down in slow lines, like the walls themselves are grieving. My hands are raw from the laundry work, and I can feel the Kansas winter settling into my lungs in a way that I recognize. The way you recognize the face of something that has been following you for a long time and has finally caught up. But I want you to understand something, and I need you to hear it clearly. They did not win. The archive is safe. Elizabeth has the method. The women in the network know what to document, how to store it, how to move it, and how to use it. The knowledge I planted does not live in any building they can lock, or any file they can confiscate. It lives in the minds of women who learned the same lesson I learned pressing my face against that schoolhouse wall in Alabama. That the only property no man can legally seize, sell, or destroy is what you carry inside your own skull. My name is Sarah Granger. I was never just a slave who fought back. I was the proof that a sharpened mind outlasts every chain ever forged, and that the truth, written carefully and passed quietly from one pair of hands to the next, is the one thing in this world that does not require anyone's permission to survive.